I am about to show you everything there is to know about crafting in Last Epoch, so you can forge the perfect items for your build. Crafting is the core of Last Epoch, but what makes it so unique compared to games like Diablo 4 or Path of Exile is that you get to choose what is crafted onto your item, and you are only restricted by how lucky you are when it comes to upgrading or removing the chosen affixes on your item, with forging potential, which I will explain in a moment. There are 3 categories of materials that you will be crafting with: Affix Shards, Glyphs, and Runes, and I will cover all of these in detail. But just in case you didn't already know, there is a transfer crafting items button in your inventory. This will auto-deposit all crafting mats from your inventory into the unlimited vault of materials as shown here. You can even click view materials to see everything you have collected so far. First, I want to cover Affix Shards, which can alter the 4 affixes available on craftable items, 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes. Prefixes are the top 2 stats on an item, which more or less boosts your offensive capabilities, and suffixes are the bottom 2 stats on an item. And aside from a few exceptions, these mainly consist of defensive stats. You can also tell these apart by the small white arrow indicators on the sides. Left is prefix and right is suffix. You can add or upgrade the tier of affixes by using Affix Shards, and every time you upgrade the tier, it will increase the effect of that affix up until the maximum craftable tier, which is tier 5. But you also have a chance to get a critical success when upgrading an affix. What critical success does is it essentially gives you an additional upgrade to a random affix on the item at the same time, with no extra forging potential used, giving you a chance to upgrade the item twice. Pro tip: holding Alt and Control when hovering over an item will show you the tiers of the affixes as well as the range it rolled within that tier. Most of these shards are very abundant and you don't need to worry about using them whenever you want. The exception, however, is finding rare shards such as +1 to skills or any other class specific affixes, which should be saved for higher end gear. Now that we have a basic understanding of affixes and how they function, let's talk about the most important aspect of crafting in Last Epoch: forging potential. This is found on every craftable item in the game and is used in the crafting process. The more potential you have, the better, as it allows you to get a lot more crafts out of the item. Lower rarity items such as magic tend to have very low forge potential, and exalted items, which are the best base rarity to craft with, will have much more. Every time you add, change, or upgrade an affix, a random amount of that forge potential is used until it reaches 0, at which point it is no longer able to be used in crafting. But you can increase the chances of saving that precious forging potential by using a Glyph of Hope, which has a 25% chance to not use any. This should be active 90% of the time alongside Affix Shards when you are crafting. So, how do glyphs work? Well, here are some examples of which one you should be using depending on the circumstance. I have this magic rarity axe here that has 15 forging potential with 1 open prefix and suffix slot. If I want to add physical damage, I would click the plus icon here, select the prefixes tab, and find physical damage. This will cost between 1 and 18 forging potential. I then equip my Glyph of Hope and click add affix. Okay, this is an example of being extremely unlucky. All of the forge potential was used in one craft, so the item is bricked. Now let's take a look at a more lucky example. I'm going to add fire damage to this quiver, so I apply my Glyph of Hope and click add affix. Here you can see the Glyph of Hope was used, so this didn't cost any forging potential. Well, if I'm doing a fire build, we now have a problem by having both lightning and fire damage. But in Last Epoch, you can fix that. So let's click on the bow lightning prefix and swap to a Glyph of Chaos. This will upgrade the tier and change it to another random prefix. Ideally, you want to use this when you have all the other stats you want on an item, and one affix just doesn't work for your build at all. So you use a Glyph of Chaos to re-roll it. But just to show you how it works, let's use it. Now I got really lucky here and managed to re-roll to bow fire damage. which scales great with the fire damage we added earlier. And it only costs 7 forge potential, so we have more room to upgrade. Let's swap back to a Glyph of Hope and try to pump up the fire damage. My luck continued and I managed to get it to tier 5 before losing all of the forging potential. But that's pretty impressive considering this was a magic item to start with, which have the lowest amount of forging potential, and it didn't have any fire damage scaling at all. So this is a great example of the control you have when crafting in the forge. And speaking of control, sometimes you find an item that rolled really good within its tier, as you can see by the range text here. But it's sitting at a low tier, like this bow with tier 2 fire damage for example. It rolled with the maximum damage within its tier, and this will change every time you upgrade. But you can prevent that by using a Glyph of Order, which keeps the item at the range it rolled. In this case, the max +8 bow fire damage. So now it says upgrade to 11, which is the max of the next tier. This is best used when you find the stat you really need and it rolled very high within its tier. Just keep in mind, you can risk tearing through your forge potential without the safety of a Glyph of Hope. Pro tip, you can use this glyph to check what an affix will upgrade to, without actually using the Glyph of Order, giving you an idea of what the next upgrade will be and if it's even worth it. The last glyph I want to cover is Glyph of Despair. These are very rare and should only be used on your best gear. Despair has a chance to seal the affix onto an item, giving the stat its own special little spot which doesn't take up a suffix or a prefix slot. Perfect for min-maxing a piece of gear. However, each increase in tier has a lower chance to seal the affix, so I recommend using it on a tier 1 or a tier 2 affix for the best chance. Trying to seal a tier 5 is impossible because it's already maxed out, and tier 4 is very rare. But if you're willing to gamble, it can pay off massively. And here is an example of this happening. I'm trying to seal it, ready? Tier 4, this is damn near impossible to do. Oh! Oh my god, nice. It only used 6 forge potential, brother! Oh my god.
He did it.
But another great way to use a Glyph of Despair is if the item has fantastic stats and tons of forging potential, but one of the affixes is just not good. Instead of using a Glyph of Chaos to reroll it randomly, praying for the right affix, you can instead use the Glyph of Despair to seal it away, allowing you to choose the affix you want. Basically, a Glyph of Despair is best used when you already have the best version of your item, with extra forging potential to make it even more powerful. There's also Glyph of Insight, used to create niche affixes found on items known as experimental items. I will cover this alongside the Rune of Research later in the video, because these are both used when crafting experimental gear. And speaking of runes, let's start with the two you will be using the most, Rune of Shattering and Rune of Removal. These are both used to give you Affix Shards, which, as you've probably figured out by now, are essential in crafting. But the tier of any given affix affects the number of shards you receive. So a tier 1 affix gives you 1 shard, and a tier 5 affix will give you 5 shards. A Rune of Shattering destroys the item and gives a random number of shards. There is no guarantee you will get the ones you want off the item. For example, if we look at this helmet with 4 affixes, pay attention to the tier 5 health, tier 2 health regen, and the tier 3 level of multi-shot. When I shatter this item, I only got 1 health regen, 3 multi-shot shards, and none of the tier 5 health, which would have given me all 5 if I used a Rune of Removal. Using a Rune of Removal is the more efficient way to guarantee the affix shard you want. The downside to using this rune, however, is it costs a lot of forging potential, and can't be used on items with 0 potential. But most times it should be used before a Rune of Shattering, especially if there are rare affixes on the item, like this chest piece here. Tier 4 health gained on Glancing Blow, and Tier 4 chance to gain Dusk Shroud. You can tell these are more rare because I have 0 of these shards, whereas on the right I have 481 Necrotic Resist shards, which are far more common. If I use a shatter rune, I risk not getting any of the rare affixes. So let's use the rune of removal instead, and apply a glyph of hope for a chance to save forging potential. Okay, we got the 4 shards for health on glancing blow, and I had enough forging potential to try for the dust shroud, which we also got. Now, I could shatter this item since it has 0 forging potential to possibly get the rest of the shards, but I don't need them, so I won't bother wasting a rune of shattering. Pro tip, you can use the loot filter in Last Epoch to help you find items to shatter for the affixes you want. All you need to do is add a rule, check the emphasize box, and select affixes from the drop-down menu. Then you just choose all of the affixes you need more shards for. This way, when an item drops and the name is capitalized, you know it has the affixes you need for your build. Keep in mind this is just the way I do it, so if you want, you could instead change the color instead of using the emphasize feature. Rune of Discovery adds affixes to all empty slots on an item, and doesn't cost any forging potential, but they will only be tier 1, and of course, will be random. So this rune is not all that useful in the late game. However, this rune can come in handy when you are leveling and find some items with low forging potential, allowing you to add some extra affixes at no cost. Rune of Ascendance is pretty self-explanatory. It simply upgrades an item into a unique within the same item type. So if you are farming for a specific unique relic, you can use this to upgrade relics into uniques and pray to the RNG gods you get the one you want. It's important to know that this doesn't mean a crystal sword becomes a crystal sword type unique. Instead, any one-handed sword will be turned into any one-handed unique sword at random. Rune of Creation can be a very powerful endgame rune to use, especially when it comes to rings, or weapons if you are a dual-wield style build. For example, if you find the perfect ring and you have some forging potential left over, use the Rune of Creation to duplicate that item, and now you have 2 of your best in slot rings for your build. And then we have Rune of Refinement and Rune of Shaping, which should only be used at the end of crafting, if you already maxed out all the affixes on the item, but the range which the stats rolled are low within their tier. Then you could use the Rune of Refinement to get the stats closer to their maximum range in their respective tiers. And you can use a Rune of Shaping to re-roll the implicits, like this Critical Strike ring with 27%. This is a pretty low roll, and could go up to 50%, so it would be worth it to re-roll this with the Rune of Shaping. Lastly, we have the Glyph of Insight and Rune of Research, used to create and enhance specific items known as experimental items. These can only be boots, gloves, and belts. I'll keep this simple because, like I said earlier, these are very niche items. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if these items will still be around when the game fully releases with 1.0. Essentially, you can use the Glyph of Insight to change a normal prefix to an experimental prefix. Keep in mind, these can't be upgraded because you are unable to obtain the experimental's Affix Shards. So this affix is not incredible, but it's not bad. Now we can use the Rune of Research to hopefully seal it to the item so we can add another prefix. As you can see, there are kinda too many steps involved here, and now I'm out of forging potential, leaving me with a pretty lackluster item. So as it stands, experimental crafting is just currently not worth it. If you want one of these items for your build, you are better off finding a dropped version, which could potentially be exalted, giving you a tier 6 or tier 7 experimental affix. Crafting in Last Epoch is easy to use and feels rewarding, all while having plenty of depth when it comes to the way you decide to create the perfect item. But hey, that's everything you need to know about crafting. Subscribe for more Last Epoch videos and leave a like if you enjoyed the guide. Thanks for chilling, I'm Manareth, and I'll be back. Peace.